Picture this. You're walking a coastal trail on the eastern tip of Long Island. The Atlantic wind is biting, and then you feel it. A low, persistent hum vibrating right up through the soles of your shoes. And then, total, unnerving silence. For decades, people visiting the abandoned military base at Camp Hero have reported exactly this kind of stuff. Compasses just dying out of nowhere, birds literally refusing to nest. Even the horizon shimmering with this bizarre, unnatural glow. So today, we're diving into one of the most mind-bending mysteries out there. This is an explainer of a story fueled by redacted files, fragmented memories, and our absolute obsession with hidden truths. Now take a look at this. That massive skeletal structure looming in the fog, that's a 250-foot radar antenna. And no, it's not some leftover movie set. This is the very real, decommissioned Camp Hero at Montauk Point. Folks around here and researchers all over just call it the Montauk Project. Because it was isolated out there on a narrow peninsula, battered by winter storms, honestly, it was the perfect sealed-off incubator for a massive legend to grow. But the question that still haunts this coastline is pretty simple. What actually went down beneath those cracked concrete foundations?
Well, the claims attached to this place, they're absolutely staggering. We aren't just talking about your standard classified military budgets here. We are talking about allegations that literally break the laws of physics. Advanced mind control programs, weather manipulation using high-frequency arrays, like supposedly spawning actual hurricanes. And it gets wilder. We're talking literal time displacement and interdimensional travel. I mean, the accounts read exactly like a blockbuster sci-fi thriller. But the crazy thing is, these claims stem from real court records, published memoirs, and decades of intense, totally serious public testimonies.
So that brings us to a massive crossroads, right? Did a super covert branch of the US government actually invent time travel right under the sand dunes of Montauk? Or are we just looking at the ultimate modern mythology? Like a story so perfectly engineered by our collective paranoia that it just took on a life of its own? To untangle this whole shebang, we've got to step away from the dark corners of the internet and actually trace this story back to its roots. Here's a golden rule when you're looking into mysteries like this. Almost every massive legend starts with a tiny seed of truth. And the true staying power of the Montauk Project, it doesn't just come from those wild sci-fi claims. It actually thrives on the very real, heavily documented history of American military research, programs that operated completely in the shadows. To figure out how a dusty old radar facility morphed into a time travel hub, we have to look at the cold, hard military history. All right, let's ground ourselves in the actual timeline for a second. Back in 1942, the U.S. Army urgently threw together Camp Hero to watch for German U-boats creeping up on New York. But, they didn't just pack up and go home when the war ended. During the absolute peak of Cold War paranoia in the 1950s, the Air Force moved in. They hooked Montauk up to the SAGE air defense system. This was a highly classified, computerized early warning grid built to track Soviet bombers. For decades, this place was a heavily restricted zone, absolutely bristling with cutting-edge tech, right up until they finally shut it down and abandoned it in 1981. So what in the world was actually happening during those decades? Well, this is where the verified historical weirdness kicks in. Veterans stationed there in the 60s and 70s consistently reported some really bizarre stuff. We're talking massive, unexplained power fluctuations that would just randomly drain the local grid. Catastrophic equipment failures out of nowhere. Entire underground zones that were strictly off-limits even to senior officers. Plus, locals were always complaining about heavy machinery grinding away deep into the night. It was often paired with these weird vibrations and electromagnetic interference that literally scrambled local radios into bizarre static. Like, for sure, something highly secretive was going on. And this, right here, is the massive leap we have to grapple with. On one hand, we've got the documented reality. SAGE air defense, electronic warfare testing, and advanced radar calibration. Very real, very secretive Cold War military operations. But on the other hand, we have the legend. Interdimensional travel and consciousness projection. So how exactly did we jump from testing radio transmitters to supposedly tearing holes in the fabric of space-time? Like, where did that massive narrative explosion even come from? Well, get ready for this, because here is an unexpected and totally fascinating piece of the puzzle. The military actually was testing massive electromagnetic fields out at Montauk. And get this, their research was directly inspired by the theories of Nikola Tesla. Yes, that Nikola Tesla.
Declassified Cold War documents show the government had a serious, sustained interest in using huge electromagnetic fields to disrupt communications, modify the environment, and even mess with human psychology. They were basically taking Tesla's theories on wireless energy and weaponizing them with a massive black budget. And honestly, this real science gave people the perfect, plausible-sounding buzzwords for the wild rumors that came next. The actual spark that blew this conspiracy wide open hit in the late 1980s right after the base closed down. Enter two guys, Preston Nichols and Al Bielek. They suddenly stepped into the spotlight as whistleblowers. Nichols was an electronics engineer, and he claimed he'd been working on projects that used electromagnetic fields to literally alter human minds. But Bielek, he went even further. He claimed he personally took a trip through time. What made their stories so dangerously compelling was the way they talked. They seamlessly mixed real engineering jargon, stuff like phase shift modulation, with these absolutely wild claims of temporal anomalies. It was this crazy cocktail of fact and fiction. Totally impossible to verify, but man, was it intoxicating to listen to. And you know what? The timing of these guys stepping forward was absolutely perfect for creating a global phenomenon. The 1990s were this massive cultural turning point, a perfect storm where new media could totally bypass the traditional gatekeepers. First, you had independent publishers pumping out books full of these alleged top-secret diagrams. Then came the late-night paranormal radio shows doing marathon interviews, beaming the story straight into millions of bedrooms and cars. And finally, the early internet. These digital forums turned into massive, decentralized echo chambers, where people all over the world could swap unverified claims, permanently cementing Montauk into modern folklore. Now you might be wondering, why on earth were people so ready to just believe these wild claims? Well, honestly, because the public's paranoia was totally justified. The late 20th century was basically defined by broken trust. People had just found out about MKUltra, which, if you don't know, was the CIA's actual, fully documented mind control program. They learned about the horrors of the Tuskegee syphilis study, they read the Pentagon Papers. The government had already proven, without a doubt, that it was willing to run deeply unethical, highly classified experiments in the dark. So, set against that backdrop of very real historical trauma, a secret time travel base didn't just feel possible, it actually kind of felt probable. To really wrap your head around Montauk, you have to understand a psychological concept called apophenia. Essentially, this is the human brain's natural hardwiring to find patterns in completely random or ambiguous information. Think about it. When you give the human mind a massive, creepy radar base, some bizarre electromagnetic tests, and zero official transparency, the brain just panics. It desperately wants to fill in the blanks. So it stitches together these disconnected fragments of classified data and wild whistleblower rumors to build one cohesive, terrifying narrative. Basically, we build monsters just to explain the shadows we don't understand. And honestly, that is exactly why the legacy of the Montauk Project matters so much today. It acts as a massive cultural mirror. This whole explainer isn't just about whether some guys built a time machine out on Long Island. It's a fascinating reflection of our own collective anxieties, our fears about unchecked tech, government secrecy, and the very limits of what humans know. It shows us just how deeply we distrust authority, and how desperately we want to believe that our reality is so much bigger and weirder than what's just officially written down on paper. Look, we might never get a perfectly clear picture of every single classified test they ran at Camp Hero. The electronic warfare testing, that was real. The interdimensional portals, those are almost certainly just mythology. But the mystery sticks around because it taps into a fundamental part of who we are. It leaves us staring at one lingering, incredibly powerful question. When history is deliberately hidden away in the shadows, what else is the human mind going to create to fill the dark?